practice helps when you're learning new things, right? Well, we still have a few more weeks to practice and become masters. Today we're going to become masters of the brush. We are going to take a very close look at the brush. We're going to look at the tip, the shaft, root, the filaments, the ferrule, and the handle. Okay, we're going to talk about natural versus organic filaments or hairs. We're going to talk about different sizes and shapes, as well as soft and stiff filaments for your brushes. We're going to talk about the palette and different kinds of palettes that you can use, and storage for your mediums and solvents. We're also going to talk about loading the brush. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about loading the brush. No. Okay, fine. We're going to talk about loading the brush and applying paint at different angles to get different effects and movements. And we're going to talk about designating brushes for different colors and different solvents, as well as cleaning the brush and storing the brush. Okay? All the different shapes: round, flat, bright, filbert, angle, mop, liner, or Ebert. Okay, so let's go. Brushes. A brush is made of different parts. This is the handle. Here we have the ferrule. Down here is the root, then the shaft, and then the tip. Brushes can be individually designated to color groups like warms, cools, black, and white. Brushes are measured in centimeters. The number on a brush actually represents each manufacturer's different code for indicating factors including size and shape. Long handle brushes allow a painter to stand farther back, so the work can be judged in its entirety. Short handle brushes allow the painter to have more control up close without hitting the back of the brush on anything. Brush hairs are called filaments. These can be natural or synthetic. Synthetic filaments are usually nylon or polyester. Because synthetic brushes do not absorb solutions, neither aqueous nor oil, they are easier to clean. With oil paint, you do not need to rest your brushes in a solvent. With acrylic and watercolor, to protect the brush from paint drying between its filaments, you should rest it in shallow water, but only in a shallow pan and not in a cup, so that the brush filaments aren't pushed backwards into any irregular shape. With oil, paint cures slowly. Oil paint doesn't actually dry, it just hardens into a foam. Because the paint cures slowly, you don't need to rest the brush in solvent. Resting it in solvent can ruin the filaments and loosen them from the ferrule. Natural hair bristles will absorb more water because, in addition to physical and chemical bonds, natural hair also has hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds are not a factor in plastic bristles. Rather, the liquid is held to and between the surface of the filaments through adhesion and cohesion. Adhesion is when molecules stick or attach on a molecular level to a surface. Cohesion is the uniting molecular force that pulls water together. Thus, if the artist needs to create a long continuous stroke of paint, a natural hair bristle will hold more liquid and therefore will have more fuel to continue a mark for a longer distance. The tip of a natural brush will be protected by a wax. A wax, starch, or gum arabic, but good shopkeepers will provide water to rinse it off if you ask to test the brush's quality. You can also dip your own brushes in wax at home to protect their shape when not in use. Stiff, natural brushes are made from boar bristle, a resilient, stiff, natural material that works well with thicker, viscous paint. The split ends of a natural hairbrush will hold more liquid and more paint. They are better for adhering large amounts of paint, dense paint, to the tip and pushing it across a large block of color on the canvas. They are necessary when thick paint needs to be planted into a surface or adhered, especially when the surface has a rough texture. Stiff bristle boar brushes, as well as palette knives, are best for gestural impasto paint texture. Soft brushes work better with thinner paint. They are better for fine details and delicate work, as well as blending, glazing, as they hide the trail of the individual texture marks of each of the filament tips. Sable point brushes are very responsive and durable, but they are extremely expensive due to their high quality material and handmade manufacturing. They naturally taper and are supreme in their ability to hold a lot of liquid. Other natural filaments sometimes used in oil paint brushes include Squirrel and Ox. Squirrel has soft hair with little spring, and so the filaments are less supporting in larger sizes. Long, strong, springy ox hairs are used to produce flats. They are better for flats because they are springy and you have more control when they are shorter. The shape of a brush determines how it should be used. A flat is a soft brush with a square shape capable of accurate marks and sharp edges, especially when made of synthetic filaments. A large flat, sometimes made of boar bristle, is better for blocking in large areas. This is actually closer because boar bristle is a natural filament, and so this is a closer brush, but this is also a large flat. When made of softer filaments like goat, it is better for smoothing and blending. A bright is a brush that is like a flat, but is shorter and firmer. So, a filbert is a combination of flat with the soft marks of a round. It is versatile enough for most styles and can be used to mix and blend paint. When I am painting on plein air or just outside looking at architecture, the only brush I feel that I need is a filbert. I can fill in the details later in the work, but when I'm just sketching in paint on plein air, the only brush I need to travel with is a filbert. A fan brush is used for blending and removing brush strokes. They are softer in synthetic filaments. When you're painting in photorealism, texture can become a roadblock. You need to get rid of the texture in most of the layers of the paint, and so you need something very soft to do that. Okay, and an angular flat or an angular dagger. This is an angular flat and this is an angular dagger. These are both angle brushes. They will create Versatile and unique marks. You can create a lot of different marks with this brush, and they're great if you want to sort of stamp them on, dabbing paint onto a surface. A mop brush is used with little pressure on the paint surface to remove brush strokes and softly, gradually blend. It is useful for glazing and varnish. Sometimes I use this brush as my mop brush, but it's actually a bit more of a filbert. It is a little less round and less flexible. Egbert Rigger or liner is a long-haired filbert brush. It can hold more paint in its longer shaft, creating a thin, even line for longer distance, and it can make extremely soft marks like grass or hair. I don't have an Egbert, but it does sound like it would be fun to paint with. So when it comes to loading the brush, some artists like to use glass palettes because they find it easier to protect or observe the true color that they're mixing, rather than seeing the color laying on top of a wood or black palette. So or even a white palette. So on the glass, you just have an opportunity to move the color to different places and even hold it in front of your painting. Okay, so when you're using your brushes, you should have a designated set for acrylics and a designated set for oils, because once oil paint is on the filaments, it will reject water. It won't be able to absorb aqueous solutions, and so your brush won't work with acrylics after you have used them with oil mediums. So when you are putting paint on the brush, the only place that the paint goes is on the tip. When you want to mix paint, you need to use your palette knife to protect your brush. So palette knives also come in different sizes, and they're usually flexible unless they're made of like a hard plastic. But palette knives are great for creating a lot of different textures in the final layers of the painting. So this is where the paint goes. The paint shouldn't move too far down the shaft. It will move down as you push a paintbrush into a painting. But it shouldn't reach the root. Okay? And it definitely shouldn't be in the ferrule. Shouldn't really gather deeper than mid-shaft. You do not want to use the root of the brush to paint at all. Okay? It's hard to clean paint from the root and the ferrule, and if it hardens there, it will cause the filaments to space apart, separate, and the whole brush will lose its shape. The way that you move paint across the canvas also will protect or destroy your brushes. So if you hold your brush at a 90-degree angle, you will dab paint onto the surface. This is really useful for impasto, but also very useful if you want to unite two different spaces. Like if you have a plane in your painting and you really need this side to look like it's the same color as this side, you can dab the paint into these places and you'll have more control over how even the paint looks than if you try to spread paint from one side to another. And then you can smooth it out once it's dabbed into those places if you prefer that texture for whatever you're rendering. The other thing is when you want to spread paint, and let's say you're not adding any mediums, you're doing maybe your first layer, holding the brush at a 45-degree angle, Okay, so 45 degrees. And pulling spreads the paint very evenly. Depending on how much paint you have on your brush, this will determine how far you can pull the paint. To push the paint, you need to move at 135 degrees, so the other way, and push the paint. This is how we adhere paint to the surface of a canvas. If a canvas has a lot of texture, it's very important to push the paint deeply in, because as the paint settles into the canvas, it will receive less light and the colors can dull or go dead. So in your first layer, you really need to ensure that the paint is pushed down deeply, so as you add more paint on top, you get the full effects of the pigments. Okay, and you can see even with pushing and pulling the paint, I didn't need to use any additional length of the ferrules. So if you add a little bit of oil to your paint, you will get the paint to flow more smoothly, and you can also see that the brush strokes, when the oily medium is included in the paint, the brush strokes will start to fall. They won't be as textural as just the dry paint with no medium in it, which is this part here. Okay. When you're cleaning the brushes, you're going to wipe the majority of the paint out of the filaments. With a gentle pull, you don't want to rip the filaments out of the ferrule. And then you would use some paint thinner to get the rest of the paint out of the spaces between the filaments. And then lastly, use a soap bar with some grit. When you're ready to clean the brush, a bar of soap with some grit in it, like this one has coffee, but you can find sand and pumice. These are great for spreading the filaments apart so that they catch on the grit and they spread and they release the trapped paint. But you're also going to want to use your fingernail or even a sewing needle to help spread the filaments apart and really get the paint out from in between the bristles. You can also try some of the brush cleaners that you see at Blick if you find one you really like. They're pretty good, but I really feel like a gritty soap bar really works better. So you really want to push all of the paint from the filament to the tip when you're pushing it out. And the brushes will stain eventually, that does happen. Okay, and then once you have cleaned the filaments, dry them off with a paper towel or a t-shirt, because that's more green of you. Responsible painter you are. And then you can just dip the tip in at a 90-degree angle. Let the largest drip of wax fall off of your paintbrush. And then you can just pinch and lightly pull to restore your brush to its best shape. And then when you're storing the brushes, store them upright. Right? Go make a beautiful piece of pottery for storing your brushes in UCal's ceramic studio. Right? Something for the long brushes, something for the short brushes. I even made this 3-part tray in a ceramic studio because I needed something very specific for my different mediums. So store your brushes upright, and then for your palette, you're going to want to scrape off the excess paint with a palette knife, and then once you have the majority of it scraped off, just wipe it off with a paper towel or a much more earth-friendly old t-shirt. You could steal all your ex-boyfriend's shirts and use them all as paint rags. Or if you're feeling a little more magnanimous, you could go to Goodwill and donate some shirts and, go to Goodwill to shop for some shirts. But remember, if you make a donation at Goodwill, you will get a discount for your next purchase. So what goes around comes around at Goodwill. Go get some rags for your studio. Okay, so thanks for taking a close look at brushes with me today. Remember to keep all the paint in the tip of the brush, not down in the root or the ferrule. Tape the handle of the brush if you're in a shared studio or in a class, because an absent-minded professor might come up and show you a demo on your painting with your brush, and then go into a lecture and walk away with your brush and use it on somebody else's painting, and then where's your brush in the classroom? You don't know. Okay, so also if you're going to store your brush in a box, or you're transporting it or anything like that, if it's in your French easel, whatever, you can wrap the tip of an acrylic brush, actually really the whole root, shaft, tip, the whole thing, with a little bit of moist paper towel, like in the solvent that you're using. If it's acrylic or watercolor, your solvent is obviously water. But if you're wrapping an acrylic brush in a paper towel, your solvent is oil. So the oil will prevent the paint that's like residual in the brush that you couldn't clean out from hardening, and it will prevent the hairs from losing their shape. And if you are using an acrylic brush with water as your solvent, and you are resting the brush in the water, you are squishing the filaments. Okay, so what you really want to do is get something more like a roller tray that you would use for like painting a wall, and rest it in more laterally so that you're not squishing the filaments out of shape. Okay, so you can now feel confident that if you are buying a more expensive brush, you will be able to take care of it and make it last. You've got the knowledge on how to care for your brushes at this point. So, good job. Glad you watched the video. Make you a better painter.